Um, Hi, my name is Shadman, and welcome to my lesson today on essay writing tips. So today we are going to be looking at the purpose of an essay, why it is important, and we will be looking at the different components of an essay, including the introduction, the thesis statement, the body paragraphs, and the conclusion of an essay. And most importantly, we will be looking at how to write an effective essay. So let's begin by talking about what an essay is and why it's important. So, an essay is a form of writing that presents an author's perspective on a topic. It consists of arguments that are supported by evidence and examples. An essay's length is determined by its purpose and the audience to which the essay is addressed. The standard structure of an essay includes its introduction, and in the introduction, there's a thesis statement, and then there are body paragraphs, and finally, a conclusion. Let's begin by talking about the introduction paragraph. So, the introduction in an academic essay will generally present an analytical question or a problem, and then it will offer an answer to that question or problem in the form of a thesis statement. The purpose of an introduction is not only to introduce the topic of the essay, but to explain to readers why the essay will be important to read. It is important that the introduction includes enough information so that readers can understand the context of the essay. So, let's say an introduction were to be 4 sentences long. The first sentence would introduce the topic. The second sentence would introduce the problem or the question at hand. The third sentence would present a solution to the problem, in this case, the thesis. And the fourth sentence would highlight the main arguments of the essay or how the essay will support the thesis. Let's take a look at a sample introduction paragraph. Many literary texts written in the 21st century allude to themes from stories and myths shared centuries ago. The resemblance that appears between the themes in a modern short story and a story from the past is known as intertextuality. Seward Goodhand's novel, Even That Wildest Hope, features short stories alluding to myths from centuries ago. In her short story, The Fur Trader's Daughter, Goodhand illustrates the relationship between Hephaestus and his artificial creation, Little Buff Duck, a figure created from wax. In his song, Pygmalion, Ovid presents the relationship between Pygmalion and his creation, Venus, a statue carved from ivory. So over here, what I did in the introduction paragraph, in the first part of this introduction paragraph, is provide context. In my in the very first sentence of the paragraph, I made it clear that I am going to be talking about uh, a text that will be serving as an intertext to another text, and due to this reason, I uh, introduced the definition of intertextuality. And then, so the first text that I would be looking at would be Seward Goodhand's novel, Even That Wildest Hope. And the specific short story that I would be looking at is The Fur Trader's Daughter. And I would also be looking at Ovid's song Pygmalion. And so I provided all this within the context section of my introduction. Now let's take a look at my thesis statement. In both Goodhand's short story and Ovid's song, the creator creates an artificial creation to fulfill a necessity that is lacking in the creator's daily life. The relationship between the creator and their creation determines not only the personhood of the creation, but also the happiness of the creator themselves. So the context that I provided in the beginning of my paragraph ultimately led up to this thesis statement. So in this thesis statement, I present the main comparison and contrast that I'll be looking at throughout the entire course of my essay, and that is that the creator in both Goodhand's short story and Ovid's song, they both their respective relationship with their creations determines not only their creation's happiness but their own happiness. And this is like the compare and contrast that I'll be looking at all throughout my essay, and this is the reason why this is my thesis statement. In the blue highlighted text, what I do is I explain the approach that I use to write the rest of my essay to present the rest of my essay. So let's take a look at that. In Goodhand's short story, Hephaestus resents Little Buff Duck, and this not only hinders her personhood, but makes Hephaestus himself miserable. In Ovid's song, Pygmalion falls in love with Venus, and this not only encourages her personhood, but creates a family between the two subjects. In both texts, the creator's feelings towards their creation acts as a driving force that determines the personhood of their creation, and this is what makes Ovid's song an intertext to Goodhand's short story. So the approach section of my introduction explains how I will be explaining that Ovid's song serves as an intertext to Goodhand's short story, which is the motive of my essay. So it demonstrates that throughout the rest of my essay, I'll be doing comparing and contrasting between these two texts. Okay, thesis statement. So now let's talk about the thesis statement and why it's important. So the thesis statement is the central claim in an essay. It is the writer's main insight about a topic. The thesis generally responds to an analytical question or a problem with a solution that the writer has framed for their readers and for themselves. The thesis provides context into why a question or a problem matters and why readers should care about the answer or solution to that question or problem. A strong thesis statement will always be arguable rather than descriptive, and it will be the right scope for the essay that one is writing. Let's take a look at this thesis statement. While Sandel argues that pursuing perfection through genetic engineering would decrease our sense of humility, he claims that the sense of solidarity we would lose is also important. Let's take a minute to think about what is wrong with this thesis statement. So the two words that stood out to me most in this thesis statement were while and also. Both of these two keywords indicated to me that this thesis is very descriptive and it is not arguable at all. So the thesis summarizes several points in Sandel's argument, but it fails to make a claim about how we should understand his argument. This is an example of a descriptive thesis that has no argument to it, and therefore it is an ineffective thesis. Now let's take a look at this thesis. Michael Sandel's arguments about genetic engineering do not take into consideration all the relevant issues. Let's take a minute to think about what is wrong with this thesis statement. So the word do not and the word all, sorry, the phrase do not and the word all, they both stood out to me in this thesis statement. So do not shows that this thesis statement is taking a side, which is a good thing. And then there's all the relevant issues, which shows that this thesis statement may be too broad in its claim. So the thesis presents an arguable claim because it would be possible to argue against it by saying that Michael Sandel's arguments do take into consideration all the relevant issues. However, the claim is too broad because the thesis does not specify which issues it is focused on or why it matters that they are considered. Readers won't know what the rest of the essay will argue, and the writer won't know what to focus on. This is an example of a thesis that, although it is arguable, it is too broad and too difficult to support with evidence, and therefore this too, like the previous one, is an ineffective thesis. Now let's take a look at this thesis. While Sandel argues persuasively that our instinct to remake ourselves into something ever more perfect is a problem, his belief that we can always draw a line between what is medically necessary and what makes us simply better than well is less convincing. Let's take a minute to assess this thesis statement. Is it the right scope? Is it arguable? So the two words and or phrases that stood out to me with this thesis statement is while and is less convincing. So while shows that the thesis begins with some description and is less convincing shows that the thesis is taking a side and is saying that something is less convincing. So this is a thesis statement with an arguable analytical claim. The claim provides a reasonable scope for a thesis because it can be supported with evidence available in the text. The thesis is neither too broad nor is it too narrow, and so this is an effectively written thesis statement. Now let's talk about body paragraphs. So a body paragraph consists of a main point, which is then supported by evidence and an explanation. The purpose of a body paragraph is to guide readers through an argument by showing them how the writer's points fit together and support the essay's thesis. The number of paragraphs in an essay should be determined by the number of steps the writer takes to build their argument. Each paragraph should focus on one main point. So every single time you have a new main point, you should be switching to a new paragraph instead of writing it all in a single paragraph. That would make it very difficult for your reader to follow through with your writing, and your reader might get frustrated and might put down the essay, which is not something you would want. And for that reason, every time you have a new main point, you should write a new paragraph. So the structure of a body paragraph should follow the PPE method, which is point, proof, and explanation. Let's begin by talking about the topic sentence. So a body paragraph begins with a topic sentence. The topic sentence, it does double duty for a paragraph. Firstly, a strong topic sentence will make a claim or state a main idea that is then developed throughout the rest of the paragraph. Secondly, the topic sentence, it will signal to the reader how the paragraph is connected to the larger argument of the essay, in this case, the thesis statement. Let's take a look at this topic sentence. In his numerous writings, Marx critiques capitalism by identifying its flaws. Let's take a minute to think about whether this is an effective topic sentence. So the two words and or phrases that stood out to me in this topic sentence is capitalism and its flaws. Capitalism would be the topic that this topic would be the topic, and its flaws would be the specific part of the topic. So in this case, it looks like Karl Marx is not just looking at capitalism as a whole, but looking particularly at its disadvantages. Please note that there are also advantages to capitalism, but the fact that he's looking particularly at the disadvantages shows that this is a well-specific topic sentence and it can be developed into a strong paragraph with the right research and evidence. So the above topic sentence makes a claim that is supportable with evidence. Readers can expect that the topic sentence will be followed by a discussion of what the German philosopher Karl Marx saw as the flaws in capitalism. Therefore, this is an effective topic sentence. Now let's talk about the evidence in a body paragraph. So a point made in a body paragraph must be supported with evidence. The evidence will help readers to see how the writer arrived at the claim they made. Evidence can take the form of quotations or paraphrase material from a source, or it may include data and results. Now let's talk about the explanation in a body paragraph. So the evidence that is presented in a body paragraph, it must also be explained. The writer must tell readers how they want readers to understand the evidence they presented. The explanation must highlight how the evidence and the point that is supported by the evidence tie back to the essay's thesis and the main argument made in the essay. So let's say a body paragraph would be four sentences in total, long in total. So the first sentence would be the topic sentence, and it would provide a snapshot of what the paragraph will be about. The second sentence would be the point. It would be a claim or a main idea that would be developed throughout the rest of the body paragraph. You could also pretty much communicate that point in the topic sentence, and then you can build on it using sentence two. So that's another alternative. Sentence three would then provide evidence in support of the aforementioned claim or main idea. In sentence four, you would provide an explanation, so an analysis of the evidence that you just presented earlier, an explanation for why the evidence is important, how it connects to the claim that you made earlier in the paragraph, and how it connects the overall paragraph or the overall claim connects to your thesis statement. Let's take a look at the sample body paragraph. In Goodhand's short story, Hephaestus fails to create Little Buff Dog according to his original plans, and this failure fuels the resentment he feels throughout the rest of the story. So this is our topic sentence, and based on this topic sentence, we know that the rest of the paragraph will be looking at Hephaestus's relationship with Little Buff Duck, and it will also be looking at how his relationship with Little Buff Duck causes him to go in a downward spiral and feel resentment towards not only Little Buff Duck, but his other creations like Christiana. Okay. Now let's take a look at the main point that is made in the paragraph. So when Hephaestus creates Little Buff Duck, he experiences false feelings of self-satisfaction. These feelings lead to the creation of a figure that struggles to blend in with the world she is created in. So this is the main point in our paragraph, and it connects back to our topic sentence, but it contrasts at the same time, it contrasts a little from it as well. But the point here is that the creator, he has created a creation when he is in an unusual state, and as a result of that, the creation experiences problems in blending in with the world. And we know that based on this point that the rest of the paragraph might be about this. We'll find out as we read through the evidence. When Hephaestus is sick, little Buff Duck is confused about how she should react to the sight of him dirtying the snow. I watched his mess melting the snow and didn't know whether I found it repulsive or not. End quote. Good hand 44 to 45, period. So over here, this evidence shows in this evidence, what I did was I incorporated a quotation from the short story, and I'm particularly looking at a scene where little Buff Duck is having trouble relating to the world around her. Um, and yeah, so it is important to note that when you have when a sentence ends with a quote, what you would do is you would put in the in-text quotation. Sorry, yes, you would in-text cite it. So in this case, the author's last name and then the page numbers 44 to 45. This is how you would do it in MLA. And then the punctuation that would normally go in the end of the sentence, you put it after the in-text citation. Okay, and then I spend the last couple of sentences in my paragraph providing an explanation as to why this evidence is important and how it is relevant not only to the wider point of the paragraph, but my thesis statement. Little Buff Duck is unable to identify the most appropriate feeling for a given situation, and she struggles to differentiate between her feelings. Hephaestus expresses regret for not creating Little Buff Duck with more soul. However, this soul is never present in his conscience as he lacks empathy for anything he creates, including Christiana, who in fact kills him. Okay, so um, the first sentence of the explanation, so the first sentence in gray, what it does is that it explains the evidence at hand, right? Like what this evidence is showing is that little buff duck is struggles to differentiate between her feelings because she was created by Hephaestus while he was going through false feelings. She also experiences false feelings, right? So the and then the second sentence, what it does is that it explains that Hephaestus has not only mistreated his little buff duck, but he has also mistreated his other creations, and ultimately this causes him um, to lack empathy for anything he creates, and as a result of all this, he is one day killed by one of his own creations, Christiana. Okay, now we are going to be talking about the conclusion paragraph. So the conclusion of an essay provides a brief reflection of the main arguments made in the essay. The conclusion reminds readers about the central claim that was followed throughout the essay, in this case, the thesis statement, and it does so by restating the thesis statement. Finally, the conclusion provides readers with an idea of the larger context that the essay's thesis and arguments may be a part of. So, the structure that I like to follow when I'm writing a conclusion paragraph is the what, the so what, and the now what. So a conclusion should not provide an exhaustive summary of all the points you made in the essay. You have already done this in your body paragraphs, and you don't have to do it again in your conclusion. Rather, the conclusion should only provide a brief recap of the main arguments made throughout the essay. This is the what portion of the conclusion. The so what. So, in the introduction of an essay, the writer explains to readers what is at stake and why readers should care about the writer's argument. In the conclusion, the writer must remind readers about those stakes and why their argument was important in the first place. So, the reader, sorry, I wrote the reader, but it's actually the writer. There's a typo there. So, the writer must do this by restating the thesis statement. Um, so, that is the so what of the conclusion. Um, and then the now what. So after having read an essay, readers should be in a position to see a topic through a new perspective. The perspective that the writer argued from all throughout their essay. In this section of the conclusion, the writer discusses other potential applications of the research and any wider action that can be taken in light of the argument they made in their essay. The writer may also explain the larger context that their topic and thesis may be a part of. This is the now what of a conclusion. So some things that you should ask yourself when you're writing the now what of a conclusion is, what can my readers now understand now that they read my paper? What is some new information or what is a new insight that they were walking away with after having read my paper? Are there any other applications for my research? What action should be taken in light of this argument? These are all questions to ask yourself when writing the now what section of a conclusion. Okay, If a conclusion were to be written in four sentences, sentences one and two would provide the what, so they would provide a brief summary of the main arguments made in the essay. Sentence three would highlight the so what. So in this sentence, you would rephrase the thesis statement to remind your readers about the central claim of the essay. Sentence four would go into the now what. So it would explain the broader significance of the essay. It would connect the essay's thesis and the topic of the essay to other similar topics in the same field or similar fields. It would help readers to understand the larger context that the thesis and the topic may be a part of. So let's take a look at the sample conclusion paragraph. It runs into another slide and it's a little longer than what you would expect from a conclusion, but the idea is still same. Is still the same at the end of the day. So we begin with the what. Um, so let's begin with yeah. Let's take a minute to read this. The contrast between Hephaestus' interaction with his creation, Little Buff Duck, and Pygmalion's interaction with his creation, Venus, demonstrates that the personhood of a creation is determined not only from the creation's familiarity with the world it is created in, but its relationship with its creator. Hephaestus creates Little Buff Duck with the purpose of making her a slave, and consequently he disrespects her. However, this disrespect only brings negative outcomes for Hephaestus, including his own death. Pygmalion creates Venus with the purpose of having a female companion, and consequently, he showers her with love. This love ultimately helps Pygmalion to find the companion he was seeking for years. Pygmalion's companionship with Venus and the birth of their daughter Paphos restores Pygmalion's love for the diversity of life around him. So over here, what I'm doing in the first few sentences of the conclusion is that I'm rephrasing the main comparing and contrasting that I've been doing throughout the essay, and that is comparing Hephaestus' relationship with Little Buff Duck and what this reveals about Hephaestus as a creator, and also looking at Pygmalion's relationship with Venus and what this reveals about Pygmalion as a creator, and ultimately looking at their individual outcomes and how Hephaestus experienced a downfall, whereas Pygmalion lived a happier life. And the reason why is because Hephaestus mistreated his creations, whereas Pygmalion loved his creations. So this is the key comparison that I made throughout my essay, and I reiterate this in the what section to remind my reader that this is what I've been mainly doing in my essay. So this is the what section of my conclusion. Now let's look at the so what section of the conclusion. So this is where I explain that why all this comparing and contrasting that I've done throughout my essay is important. The empathy that a creator has for not only their creation, but the diversity of life around themselves predicts the life and death the creator encounters in the resolution of a story. So over here, so this is my thesis statement, and what I'm arguing here is that um, if a creator treats their creation well, then um, they end up living well by the end of the story. But if they treat their creation poorly, then like Hephaestus, they suffer tragic consequences in the end of a story. Okay, so and then I take a few sentences to build on the so what of my yeah, to build on the so what section of my conclusion. So over here, I'm not really restating my thesis, but what I'm doing is I'm kind of restating the so what in order to explain again why my thesis is important. And by doing this, I'm starting to move towards the now what section of my conclusion and starting to bring my essay to an end. Whereas Hephaestus' false sense of self leads him to engage in obsessive behaviors that eventually kill him. Pygmalion marries Venus in front of the gods and goddesses of his culture. The blessings Pygmalion and Venus receive from these gods and goddesses appear in the virtuous and special birth of their daughter Paphos. So over here, I am building on the so what by looking particularly at the resolutions of each of the short stories, the denouements of the short stories. So whereas one of the creators dies, the other one survives, and he lives a happy life. In this demonstrates the moral idea that you should not be mistreating your creations, because if you do, it will come back to you and it will cause issues in your own life. So that's the moral idea that I was working towards. And I've been exploring this further on in my so what section of the conclusion. And after having done this, I can now finish off my conclusion with the now what. So in conclusion, Ovid's song provides a positive intertext to good hence short story, as it communicates the significance of having respect for not only one's own creation, but also for the diversity of life around oneself. If one fails to respect this diversity of life, they're bound to be punished for their ignorance by the laws of nature. So over here, what I'm doing is I'm taking the moral idea that I just talked about earlier in my conclusion paragraph, and I'm connecting it to real life. And I'm doing this by saying that um, by explaining the idea that what goes around comes around. So if somebody wrongs their creation, if somebody wrongs their creation, they are bound to face consequences as well. And these consequences are triggered by the laws of nature, which is a term and, in fact, something that we have definitely heard about outside of these two texts that I looked at throughout my essay. So I hope these tips are helpful for essay writing and how to write for essay writing and how to write an effective essay. However, if you have any further questions or if you want to gain any more knowledge about how to write an essay or strategies for essay writing, please feel free to visit the two following links. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful day.